And I was saying that if we talk about the past, 40 years ago, I have memories of having been my editor at the time at Michigan Farmer Magazine, Dayton Matlick, called me in and gave me the sort of the assignment of a lifetime. And the reason that I got the assignment was basically because everybody else was gone. And I was the only one left. And he said someone that is his source in the Michigan Department of Agriculture had called him about a shipment of milk that had been seized down south because they thought it had lead in it. But when they tested it, one of the stranger coincidences of modern life was that that department had a new machine, a gas chromatograph that nobody had had before. This was a new gizmo on the market. And the person had been testing various chemicals in order to see what the levels looked like. And the last chemical that he had tested was a strange and obscure one called polybrominated biphenyl, which was a fire retardant, and he had taken it out of the machine and cleaned it, ran the sample of the milk, and the spikes looked identical. And he thought, I screwed up the machine.
Yeah, that's probably what same thing we're doing here.
Exactly. It was like the board here. Yeah. And he said, oh, well, there's something wrong. I didn't clean it properly. He ran it again and again and again, and realized, no, it's because it was PBB. And really, because the machines were so new, they think that it could have been months, if not longer, for anybody to figure out what the chemical was. And that set off that multi-year disaster where we saw 30,000 head of cattle culled and put into a pit in Kalkaska. We found out that the contaminated animal feed that these animals had eaten was eaten by other animals in Michigan. We even did some testing on carrots years later and found out there was PBB in the carrots. The entire state was so saturated with this chemical that more than 90% of the people in the state had PBB in the fat, PBB molecules in their fat. So I got a call last Thursday night from a friend who said, it's Wendy Banka, the president of the Michigan Small Farm Council, who said, I was at the Michigan Agriculture Commission meeting today, and I heard them talking about this contaminated animal feed. And I thought, oh no, here we go again. And to a degree, here we do go again. What we see is that a farmer back in August in western Michigan, who has a very large operation, obviously a factory operation, had 10,000 turkeys die over a weekend. And that's a pretty good clue something's wrong. So they immediately got in contact with MDARD, Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development, tried to track it down. It's a long, convoluted story. Let me cut to the chase. What happened is 50,000 dead turkeys later, we also find out that this contaminant got into the feed that the pigs ate. And the contaminant is a drug residue from lazalicid, which is a drug that's used to treat parasites in various animals. I mean, it only is authorized for 3 types of animals, including poultry, but lots of animals get these problems with these parasites called coccidia. Even dogs and cats can get it. So we've got this drug residue in this animal feed, and tracking it down and figuring it out. There's a company called SureGreen down in Ansonia, Ohio, that is supposed to take restaurant grease and oil, recycle it, and then send it to the feed mill so that they put it into the animal feed, and sounding eerily like PBB, instead shipped out this drug residue from the manufacturer of this drug. And it is a really toxic drug. It's designed to kill these parasites, and different animals react more than others to it. But obviously the turkeys, as Bill said to me this morning, they were the turkeys in the coal mine. They were the canaries in the coal mine. The bottom line that's disturbing is this happened last August. We're just finding out about it now, despite the fact that these animals, that's 5 months. I don't care how you slice it. Nobody's telling us about it. It was just an offhand sort of brief report at the Michigan Ag Commission meeting, where normally the press just isn't there to any great degree. So it wasn't a story that anybody was trying to promote. So I spent the weekend, I talked to the state veterinarian, James Averill. He was very cooperative. I got a lot of information from him, but I mean, this is a story we have to stay on, because if you are what you eat, we have been eating some nasty stuff.
Surprise.
And some of those pigs got to market because nobody knew there was anything in their feed.
And we're not asking enough questions, not just about this, but about what else are we eating? I mean, you kind of got the idea they're doing these, but I don't really like knowing that I'm eating something that was used to be thrown away.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not that unhappy to see vegetable oil from, McDonald's fries recycled. But somebody, somewhere along the line, there is an FDA investigation underway, and it may well turn into a criminal investigation with somebody indicted, because apparently there was some paperwork changed where the stuff came into a facility as not for human consumption, not for animal consumption, biofuel only, and it went out of that facility as, hey, throw it in your animal feed, it'll be fine.
I guess for me, there's a contrast here in terms of the public health concerns, because I mean, obviously this has some potential. If it's killing turkeys and whatnot, it's a threat to us as well.
I wouldn't sprinkle them on my Doritos.
Well, I wouldn't eat Doritos, so. But
actually, the Doritos might be
might be healthier.
No, worse.
But the reality is that for me it's a contrast to a story I've been working on out of Gaylord, where you have one alleged sex worker who's allegedly HIV positive, and they've made really a federal case out of it up there. You know, issuing press releases and warning the public about this woman, and obviously the risk to the public is exceedingly low, even if they're frequenting a sex worker. Yet in a case like this, where how many people may have been exposed to this now?
What we learned later was that this feed went to more than 100 farms in 8 states. So the pigs on that farm were withheld from market. They tested 10 samples of the livers of these animals, and one turned up to have 30 parts per billion, which is not undetectable. That is a level you ought to be concerned about with a toxic chemical. So what they decided to do is that they decided that the appropriate withdrawal weight was 28 days, and they just held 5,000 pigs a week out of market for 28 days. Well, I'm not so sure that that is all that. You know, I don't like the idea that those animals weren't culled. And my concern is that, as I asked the state vet, is there a chance that other animals here in other states got through and were slaughtered and sold as pork chops? And he said, yeah, I mean, you could have had, your bacon could have had a little bit of that in it. He said at those rates he wouldn't have been personally concerned about eating it. But I remember the old PBB days where John Engler said, I'd eat a steak with 10 parts per million PBB in it. And it's like,
well, and now we would say, no, you wouldn't. and I think that that's interesting, that there is that significant of a risk, and yet there has been no public conversation about it at all.
Yeah, Bonnie and I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I read an article, a press release they put out on something to do with the impurities in gasoline.
Yeah.
Right.
That doesn't kill me
on that.
or make me sick. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is a total different, let's protect the industry.
Well, and you know, we just had a massive recall of citrus, I think, out of Florida, because listeria was found in one of the processing plants. We can recall citrus because of listeria bacteria traces in one processing plant, but nobody bothered to say, hey, we've got this situation with this toxic chemical, we should do a recall of all the meats potentially impacted. That raises real concerns for me.
I think a lot of it was already in the food chain and they couldn't have recalled it. Because I think by the time they found it out, the only reason we know about it at all is that the turkeys died. If the turkeys hadn't died, no one would have ever known it was in the swine, because they had no symptoms.
Well, but that in and of itself raises concerns. They knew in August. Why weren't we told?
Yeah.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7. You're listening to Lansing Online News Radio with Bonnie Buckaroo and Bill Castaner. Todd Heywood has joined the conversation as well, as we're talking about this issue of government transparency. I did ask people, I said, why are we just hearing about this now? Well, they felt that it was sort of a timely notice. My theory is that I called the public communications person for the Michigan Department of Community Health, and I asked her if she had a comment, and she said, I'm unfamiliar with the case. And I said, what do you mean unfamiliar? She said, well, I'll find out about it and call you back. And when she called me back, she said, well, that's being handled by the FDA and the USDA. And I thought, yeah, but your job is to protect our health here in Michigan. And this is a Michigan farm. You won't give me the name. I mean, I'm going to have to FOIA that, try to find out, try to get more information. It seems as though it is designed to try to make us feel confidence in the food system rather than to earn confidence in the food system because of the communication problems. I just really think this is a huge communication problem.
We saw real issues with that with the Enbridge oil spill.
Absolutely.
You know, the community health assessment that was done was not a full assessment. And yet it was always presented as that. And when you asked challenging questions or you asked for the data to support their conclusions, you had to do a FOIA, or it was protected because it's, a trade secret sort of situation.
We've been talking about all the different categories that you can't get the information. This, for example, I called the company down in Ohio, tried to talk to somebody there, got hung up on ultimately. They weren't keen to tell me. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that we were given the name of the company that is being looked at, the one that supplied the supposedly restaurant grease, which turns out when you make the drug, this lasalicid that treats these coccidia, You do it in a fermentation process that uses soybean oil.
Oh.
And so the residue of the drug goes into the oil. So you have this leftover oil. Now I'm going to have to do some additional digging, but I don't know, because of the high residue levels in it, whether that means it's expensive to offload it, or you can't, I mean, it's okay for biofuel, but maybe it sells more if it's an animal additive. The big scandal that I think we really need to think about is the biggest change since PBB and now. I mean, PBB was a disaster because you had a chemical company making fire retardant in one line, animal feed supplements in another, and they switched the bags. You know, I mean, that's not a good situation. They were close enough to have done that. The situation here that I'm concerned about is in the intervening 40 years, what we've seen is that most of the feed additives are no longer domestically produced.
Yep.
And guess where they come from? The bulk of them come from China. And we see just a few years ago that the Chinese were putting melamine into the dog food, right? Into the things that were going into the dog food. And so you really wonder. And it appears what we have, and I'm not trying to be overly critical here, but it appears what we have is a reactive system rather than a proactive system. We're not out there with a bunch of inspectors looking for problems. We're waiting until those turkeys drop dead, and then we take a look.
Well, and you know, I can't remember who it was that announced it, but the food inspectors from the federal government, they want to balance it out so that they can have something like 264 factories that they're responsible for inspecting versus the 300 that they're currently inspecting.
Bill and I were talking about that. It's years between inspections. Yeah.
And that I think points to part of the problem is that we have the regulations in place. We had the regulations in place to prevent the Enbridge oil spill, but the oversight wasn't there. You know, we're relying on the companies to be honest brokers, and as we saw with Enbridge, that just wasn't really the case.
And that's how government's changed.
It is how government's changed.
I remember when I worked for the agency that did my OSHA inspections. Every major inspection that resulted in some sort of substantial fine, or we did a press release on it, every one.
Yeah.
That ended when John Engler was elected. Absolutely.
And it's now become bipartisan.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Both parties clamped down.
Yeah, you couldn't do that after that, but it was to alert people that these things were going on. To be, you know.
And I think that.
And they once honored FOIA requests in a way that's very different.
We just gave people this.
I was just gonna say I think that also reflects on the fact that we have changed. You know, the preamble to FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, is very clear that in order for citizens to participate in government, that the documents and information should be readily available to us to be informed participants in society. Government should always err on the side of transparency.
Yes.
And we don't see that happening anymore. I mean, we run into wall after wall after wall after wall to hide information from us.
The role of a communications officer in state government across the country and in federal government is not to communicate.
Oh, no.
The role of a communications officer, I mean, I've seen just horror stories come out of information that has been suppressed. I have been at workshops where they are simulating what we would do under various kinds of problems, and the first reaction is, well, no, don't tell them that.
Yeah,
no, don't tell them that. No, no, I would wait on that.
And don't give them that document.
Don't give them that one, no.
I recall working with the Detroit Free Press in a major story that they wrote on the sort of where MyOSHA was in a certain period of time, how well they were doing. And we just gave them unbelievable amount of information on a database, knowing the outcome.
That they would find things to criticize.
And they did. They killed us. But the boss said, you know what? You live with what you are.
Yeah.
We got to do better. But that information went out. You'd never get that today.
No, absolutely not.
You'd go away.
Well, you can get it, but it would be a protracted fight. And as somebody who has gotten scandal documents like that, I can assure you that you would talk about, instead of maybe 20 days to get just sort of a traditional FOIA response, you are going to look at months and or years before you would get a fully responsive FOIA.
And fees that will choke you.
Oh, absolutely.
And with half the pages
the
blacked
computers
out.
to run the data the way they wanted it,
Todd
which made more sense.
Todd has testified repeatedly down at the Capitol trying to get some of these laws changed. I would like to bring into the conversation, because I know he has something relevant to say on this too, is Ray Holman, because he has been covering this situation whereas they have outsourced things in our prisons.
Right.
And we now have the, a private company, Aramark, handling the prison food service in prisons. You've had to dig out information. I mean, the press doesn't have enough investigative reporters to be digging that out. You have to be in the position of finding that information and taking it to them.
Yeah, you really have to stay on top of things, just like Todd said. It's very frustrating, and unfortunately, the system is sort of built to protect the the rich and famous, as they say. So it is frustrating and a scary conversation tonight. Wow, I was worried about the storm out east, but now I'm worried about some other things tonight.
You have no turkeys in your freezer.
No.
Out of there.
Noam Chomsky once said that the real function of government is to keep power and wealth in the hands of the people who already have it.
Now, this would have been a big-time story if it had affected chicken wings on Super Bowl weekend.
Oh, no, that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
although it was last August, so 5 months ago, and Bill and I were debating about exactly how the turkeys don't live that long, but could a few have snuck into Thanksgiving dinner?
Oh, absolutely, because they could have been killed and frozen and kept for that framing time.
They figure, though, that the dose, for some reason, was killing them so quickly that they found out the minute any turkeys chomped down on it, but it may have been going into swine feed with undetected. But you shouldn't have to be playing that kind of roulette.
No, you shouldn't. I should say, sort of going back a little bit,
yes.
as you mentioned that I testified for FOIA reform, there is FOIA reform that's been signed into law.
Yes.
It goes into effect July 1st. And the economic stonewalling that we have been running into may stop being the problem. The new law says that a government agency can't charge more than 10 cents a page, period. That's the fee.
You got dinged for video, though, didn't you? Does it address video?
I have never been dinged for video in terms of like super expensive.
So they can't charge hourly anymore?
Not from my understanding. Ray, do you have a better understanding of that? Because I didn't even know it had passed, so I feel like an idiot.
I was wondering what the changes were. I saw them.
I know the big change is that it's 10 cents a page, that's it. I would suspect, because some of the negotiations and conversations that we had in the process, because I did advise Tom McMillan. I mean, there's a strange set of bedfellows.
There was Todd there in front of the Tea Party, person, and I thought, and you talk about strange bedfellows. Woo, that was interesting.
And former Representative McMillan, I think, truly respected me, and I have to say, on FOIA, he was absolutely right.
Absolutely,
his positions on that was right on. So, but what was interesting is we did negotiate, because there are times where there are, and I know that I've created FOIAs that are overburdensome to a government entity, in part because I don't want to tip my hand as to what I'm actually looking for. So I'll ask for a broader list of documents than I actually need to bury what I'm looking for. And so I think there needs to be, and I think there is, or probably will be, I don't know, some ability for a government agency to say, now wait a minute, this is going to take us 600 hours to put this together and evaluate it. 10 cents a page is just simply not acceptable.
Well, you also have a membership that will keep you apprised of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, Todd knows more about that issue than I do. Usually our information comes right from our members, and obviously we represent state employees, and so we get a lot of information from our members. And of course, if there's something going on with outsourcing, a lot of times we'll get the information from, for example, the Detroit Free Press. They may FOIA information about outsourcing, and we sort of take advantage of that way. But I have not, done that myself. Mm-hmm. Like Todd knows far more about that than I do. But we do get a lot of information. We've got access to a lot of information just because we represent so many different people and so many different departments, and they're happy to tell us what's going on.
One of the nicer things about FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, is that you don't even have to be a journalist to file.
No.
I mean, it's for private citizens, and if you're concerned about what a government entity is doing, then you can ask to see the relevant documents, and they make it fairly simple. It's not you don't have to fill out 32 pages, and that kind of thing. It was designed after Watergate to really help open up the system. And I think at first they were taken very seriously, both by the agencies and also by when you saw an article in the newspaper that revealed something like this, there was really an outcry where something had to change.
Right.
I think what we're seeing nowadays, though, is that maybe there is sort of compassion fatigue of a sort. It's kind of like it's hard to dig these out. It's expensive in many cases.
Right.
Reporters, there aren't as many of them. They break a blockbuster, and it just seems like nothing changes.
I think that's part of it, but I also think the reality is that we're in a 24-hour news cycle. And that 24-hour news cycle is very, very good at distracting us with useless crap.
Oh, well, there's that.
I mean, I'm
10
quite...
reasons
Yeah,
to...
yeah, exactly. You know,
Deflated footballs.
Right.
yeah, exactly.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
yes, I'm concerned about the storm in the Northeast.
Yeah.
I'm worried, and I have friends who live in New York City. I hope they're going to be fine. That is not the big story to me, but you know the national media, which is all based in New York City, is going to spend all day tomorrow focused on the storm hitting the Northeast.
Ray and I have already planned
Yeah,
on it.
we've already talked about it. It's
Hunkered
going to be,
down.
it's entertainment, really.
It is.
You know.
Especially if you're not in it.
Right, exactly. You're like, exactly.
Turkey's dying.
Nice.
That-
cup
so-
of hot
No one
Yeah.
cares.
Yeah, but I mean, but could you imagine the situation that we had over Christmas a year ago
I
with the
know.
Board of Water and Light being the national attention?
Which it deserved.
It did deserve
it
because
did.
of all the issues that happened there. And yet, could you imagine that being the folk? No, it would never have made national.
In
news.
fact, they were concerned that people might be without power for a day or two.
Yeah.
New York.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Try 14 days here, some people. Yeah, that's up
So
to them.
I'm not necessarily sure that people don't get outraged. I think it's that we have such a short attention span now that it's like, oh, I'm angry about that. Oh, look,
Exactly.
Miley Cyrus did this.
Right.
Oh, you know, I mean, it's just it drives
Bill
me nuts.
Belichick is holding a press conference. Right.
Or you know, I posted yesterday the thing about Florida discussing releasing genetically modified mosquitoes.
Yes.
Yeah.
To
Did that raise a red flag or two?
well,
One would hope.
personally, my response was because I read the information, I read the preliminary study information that's available about it. There's no risk. All it does is it makes it so that they're going to release the males,
They can't breed.
so they can't breed. I mean, and if they do breed, the eggs die.
Yeah.
I was hoping they would eat anacondas.
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Or alligators or crocodiles for that matter. But people are freaking out. Well, if it bites me, it's going to inject genetically modified things into my body and I'm going to mutate into a monster. And that's just not how mosquito bites work. I mean,
It isn't, but on the other hand, once we start playing with the environment, we kill off
Oh.
one bug. We don't always look at
Yeah,
the...
we haven't been good at that.
We've not been
no,
real good at that.
and I would point, I mean, if you want to talk about balancing the environment, the reality is, you know, Lake Victoria in Africa is dying.
It's a
No,
swamp.
yeah.
And it's
gonna
dying.
become a swamp.
Yeah.
And it's dying because U.S. Army Corps of Engineers screwed it up by introducing a non-indigenous predator
Yep.
that destroyed 70% of the native species of
We
fish in
have
there.
a bad track record with this kind of thing.
So-
You're listening to LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. This is Bonnie Buckaroo and Bill
What-
Castaneer.
what
We're
was the-
talking with Ray Holman of the United Auto Workers and also with Todd Heywood, just so everybody knows.
I was going to ask this odd question. What was the first species that would have been introduced that went out of hand? Can you remember, Bonnie? I mean, you won't remember it because it was rabbits in Australia, I know, but...
Right, and then there were, Australia is one of those really good test cases because anything you bring onto that island
Oh.
is not going to creep in from anywhere else very easily.
I think you probably need to narrow that down to a specific time frame.
Yeah.
I think pre-biblical you could really find some good examples. I mean, this has always been a problem.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So,
Nutria in Louisiana.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They still haven't found anything to do with those critters.
Brown snakes in Guam.
Brown snakes, yeah. They
You
eat
know.
they eat the birds.
Yeah, they eat the birds, and they're actually dropping poisoned lizards on parachutes down to feed to kill them. I mean, really, honestly, that's one of those studies that they're doing in Guam right now. It's just bizarre.
I think in the grand scheme of things, the poisoned lizards with parachutes in Guam has taken us a bit further afield tonight than we might have originally planned.
Yeah, we better get back to it.
We started out with turkeys in western Michigan. And I don't know, there's something about that visual of those little lizards hitting the island with their parachute.
Paratroopers.
But isn't this why people tune in to Lansing Online News Radio? Is so that they can go from turkey farms in West Michigan to dead lizards parachuting in Guam?
We hope so. Otherwise, this could be our last show.
I think you have to entertain people to get the point across. The point has been made for me. I am worried about that food stuff. Gosh.
Well, you know what's interesting to me? I have not yet launched this publication called My Food News, right? Not My Food News, MI for Michigan.com, because busy trying to build it. I think it's a great idea. I think people care about food. And last week I heard about this bill that's been introduced to try to promote urban agriculture. There's a 4012, I believe, House Bill 4012. And it's going to be that you could have chickens in a few chickens and, grow stuff in your backyard. And I posted a little notice of it on the site as I'm building it, right? And I found out it got like 500 hits the first day. And I thought, I write serious stuff, that for other places that don't get anywhere near that. This story today I noticed on Facebook had 57 shares. I don't get 57 shares. Yeah. There is an intense interest.
Yeah.
I mean, there really is, I think, in what are we taking into our bodies. If we are what we eat, what the hell are we eating? And I think that's a real worry. And I think that we have to have a government that is not just transparent, but also proactive.
Yeah. Ray, do you think we're cutting back on inspectors in all kinds of areas in state government?
Definitely. There was an audit just came out. We're cutting back on daycare inspectors and DHS. I know it's a little bit different topic or different subject, but to answer your question, yes. And unfortunately, we just last Friday, 100 people are going to be laid off from the Department of Human Services, caseworkers, and we don't have enough people doing audits or inspections. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is that behind the reorganization of that department that's going to be collapsed with community health?
Yeah, there's a lot going on with state employees. And one of the big thing that jumped out is they're going to be combining the Department of Community Health and the Department of Human Services together.
Two largest departments.
Well, the largest department is Department of Corrections. But together, these two departments are going to have 14,000.
What?
It's going to be a mammoth, major mammoth department. And so there's a new director, Nick Lyon, will be the director, apparently, of this giant department of 14,000. We have members in both departments. Of course, we're concerned because Governor Snyder made this announcement at the State of State address last Tuesday. But the Friday before, we learned they're going to merge the two departments. 100 people were laid off.
Oh.
But you have to realize, when you say 100 people are laid off, unfortunately, around February 15th, they'll actually lose their jobs. But the people remaining are bumping all around because it causes a ripple effect.
Oh.
So people have to change their work location. Some people have to move. Managers, non-exclusive represented employees are coming back down the bargaining unit. So it's disruptive.
Wow.
Yeah, and the caseworkers are already slammed, as I've said many times on your show before. They got between 800 to 1,300 cases on their loads. And so then Governor Snyder says, oh, we're going to combine the departments, and we're thinking outsourcing, as you know, we're talking about that a little earlier today. And does that mean more layoffs? The layoff, though, actually was from the department being short-funded $7.5 million for this current budget here, the 14-15 budget, and that's why the people, unfortunately, were laid off. But anyway, a lot of big stuff going on with state employees. We had our lawsuit heard in the state Supreme Court.
You've got a new Civil Service Commission member that there's some people are starting to ask a few questions about.
Correct. Janet McCullen is the new Civil Service Commissioner. She was the acting director of the Civil Service Commission, and she retired. That's, as a state employee, she retired, and then she was appointed actually to the Civil Service Commission, and there's 4 Civil Service Commissioners. And that's a big deal for us because, as I mentioned just a second ago, our lawsuit involves the civil service and constitutional questions and authority questions over the state workforce. So a lot of stuff going on for our membership, and no doubt.
For listeners, and also for me, because I'm kind of an idiot, how did we get short-funded $7.5 million?
Well, that was just through the budgeting process, the budget for the Department of Human Services for the fiscal year that started October 1st.
Sure.
And so the fiscal year goes October 1st, 2014 through 2015. And it's because when I'm saying short funding, that was in comparison to the budget before.
Okay.
Right? If that makes sense.
That much less?
That much less, right.
All right.
And what's scary is, on top of all of this, because of tax giveaways.
Right.
And in fairness to multiple governors of both parties that were promised these corporations a long time ago, we're down $325 million. Now,
Yes.
they got to go back in and find cuts. And we don't know how they're going to do that. Is that going to be staff or is that going to be programs? And next year's budget, they're also, because of these tax credits that are being called in by these corporations, we're going to be down almost a half $billion in the future. Allegedly, when the economy's starting to get better.
Right.
And so there's, again, they're starving us, they're starving government. Do that, of course, we're going to fail at our jobs because they're going to be understaffed. Because I just told you how understaffed we are. We don't have enough inspectors, and it's just the whole cycle over and over again.
Tax giveaway. I hate to admit I worked at MEDC, which basically authorized those, and did not know that is quite how they worked. Where you can just present your bill 10 years later and you get $240 million. One company, I think. I wonder who that is. Could that be GM, do you think?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah, but I mean, $240 million. Do you think that what that does to a company's bottom line all of a sudden? The cash.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good cash flow.
Wow.
Can we do that as taxpayers?
Yeah.
I am watching out in my neighborhood. Jackson National Life put in that huge facility where they deeded part of the land to Lansing that is not even contiguous, doesn't touch it in any way. And then they came back a few years later and they said, well, you know what? We shouldn't have to pay even the minuscule amount of property tax. We said we might chip in because we built this building that is so bad and such a white elephant that it couldn't be used for anything else, and therefore you shouldn't make us pay any property tax on that. And of course they win. There's a law firm that specializes in helping places make these arguments. And I'm watching them then. They came in, they said, we want to build a new building around the corner.
Right.
And I'm thinking, oh, whoopee. Right? And guess what? It looks just like the other building. That white elephant that they said they shouldn't have to pay for because it was such an awful piece of architecture. Well, God, it's really reminiscent of that other piece of architecture. So I can imagine what's going to happen if the tax bill ever comes due. We are really in a new era, I believe. And I think that those of us who are old, and maybe that's the reason everybody wants rid of us, is because we have been around here long enough. I mean, I do hear echoes of PBB. I hear echoes of all the, but, what we're seeing is really the dismantling of government. The only people left in the only area that's expanding are the communications people who try to tell you everything's okay, or who refuse to give you the information that you can find out something's bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other big thing that's coming up is in May, they're going to ask the voters to raise taxes to pay for the roads. And so if that doesn't pass, there's going to be more pressure on schools, going to be more pressure on local units of government, it's going to be more pressure on the general fund. And so, interesting times. And like you said, it's nerve-wracking.
The legislature ducked that issue.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't duck the issue like taxing pensions.
Right.
That was okay, but this one, no.
I mean, I think I have a question, though. Ray, do you think that this legislature, with its current makeup, its ideological makeup in particular, would ever approve any sort of tax hike to fix the roads in Michigan?
No.
I mean, I think it's a legitimate question.
And let me ask you another question. Have you run into anybody who said they're voting yes?
I don't have many people who are talking about it in my circle right now. I think it's just starting to roll onto people's attention span. And personally, I can tell you, I still haven't figured out whether or not I'm going to vote yes on it.
I mean, I've been talking to some, colleagues, faculty-type people who really study these issues. They're very serious about their citizenship. And even though they say, as a goo-goo proposition, they should definitely vote for it, they're not gonna. Because their argument is, this legislature has done this, and they need to, in essence, they need to pay part of the price. But I'm not sure they'll ever pay the price.
Yeah, and it's not polling very well. I think there's a new poll came out, and usually I think something like this for a ballot proposal, you want to be up 6, 7, 8 percentage points. You want to have a little bit of a cushion because mostly they lose.
Right.
And so now it's it's very, very early, and some major players have not weighed in yet. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And I appreciate what you're saying, Todd, in terms of maybe not supporting, or what you're saying, Bonnie. But I am nervous if it doesn't pass. I am kind of nervous about what's going to happen because I do know the makeup of the legislature right now, and it's more conservative than it was last year.
Right.
And it's going to be interesting to see how Snyder responds. He did veto that gun bill recently, so that was a little surprising that he did that. I'm not sure if he's going to change or
Oh,
not.
was it the
Domestic.
domestic
Yes.
violence?
Yeah.
Right.
The
Yeah.
issue was that people who were under a PPO for domestic violence and so forth could still have access to guns.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, and he vetoed that.
Concealed weapons, actually.
Well, that's right.
One thing too that I wanted to mention on air, there's a real interesting bill that you may be interested in as a former state employee. It's Senate Bill 8. They want to put tracking devices in every single state car to know exactly where every single state employee that's using a state vehicle is at all times.
I'm surprised they haven't done it already.
Right, and some people thought they already had that technology. But it's kind of interesting because, a lot of state employees, you may see a state vehicle at a Myers, and you may assume it's somebody taking advantage, but a lot of times foster care workers are going in Myers to get some diapers for a kid, or they're taking a family to do something.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different reasons why you may see a state vehicles at different places.
Sure.
But apparently, and this is kind of how our government works, there was a person that was playing golf on state time, and they were caught doing that with a vehicle. And so now Senator Shoemaker has decided that every single state car needs a tracking device. And my question to her is, well, how much money is that going to cost the state? And
Versus one guy playing golf.
Well, right, and versus we could use that money for other programs and other resources. But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting question, interesting bill, Senate Bill 8.
Well,
And
maybe.
how many people does she know who may be campaign donors who make devices that go on automobiles?
I have no,
Well,
I have no idea.
She is the representative for the American Legislative Exchange Council
Ah, yeah,
in
Alec.
the state Senate. So
All right.
I should point that out. But I would also point out, maybe the Religious Freedom Restoration Act will get passed, and we could all claim religious freedom violations if they do tag the cars with GPS. That
Yeah.
your sincerely held religious beliefs, which really don't affix to any mainstream belief, actually prohibit you from being tracked by GPS.
I am really offended at some of the priorities that our legislature has been spending money on. I mean, we see drug testing of people who are on welfare now, and we see this as a real, this is the kind of boondoggle that we see that happened down in Florida with Governor Scott, where his, cronies
Yeah.
collect all the money for doing the testing.
Well,
You don't find anybody. It's just, they're wasting a lot of time working on non-problems when we have really serious issues here.
Yeah, well, and also to take that a little bit further, they're also bringing back a bill that would cut off cash assistance for whose kids who skip school.
Yeah, that's a new
yes.
one.
Yeah,
that's
it kind of goes along with the drug bill too.
How many days?
Yeah, well, I know, and everybody. I skipped school quite a bit when I was a kid, and lots of people skip school. So
And I think we do so little to reinforce parental authority, and we have so few, formal and informal structures in communities anymore that can help families. One of the things that I loved, I worked with an officer, and her name was Sergeant Joanne Barnes-Coney up in Flint, and she was policing a neighborhood that she had grown up in, and she came up with, I thought, the city was talking about passing a curfew so that kids would go home and study, and rah, 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 rah. And she said, well, wait a minute, what kind of curfew are you going to have that's suitable for an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old? They're very different. So her program was, she went to all the parents in her neighborhood, and she let them set individual curfews for their own kids. She talked with them, and every month, if they reported that the kids had perfect attendance, Joanne took the kids for a treat. And sometimes it was a trip to the museum. She had an old rickety school bus she could use. She'd take them to the museum. She'd take them to the park. She'd tell them about the wonders of how she got out of the neighborhood by getting a college degree. This was the kind of program where you had no losers, and a parent could set one curfew for a 6-year-old, one curfew for a 15-year-old. And these were the kinds of things we should be doing. And instead, we're making it impossible because nobody has any time to do anything. They're so overburdened.
They are, and everything is. I mentioned this before on your show, is for caseworkers is flipping computer screens and entering data.
Yes.
And you having your hands really tied to the computer and not being able to get out and do the things you just mentioned. It's so frustrating. It seems like we're going more in that direction every day. It's kind of like maybe teaching to the test type of concept.
Yes.
And I was a caseworker for many, many, many years, but what the caseworkers have to do now, I wouldn't want to do the job because it's not social work anymore. It's flipping computer screens.
It's not helping people.
No.
One of the other things is if they want to be strict about state employees driving, my guess is most state employees are working more than 40-hour weeks.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of cell phones, because of technology they take home.
They absolutely
Why not give them a
Bill.
perk,
Absolutely.
for God's sake? It's a tough job.
Yeah, they're working through lunches, they're working late hours, absolutely. And you know what? And I feel like it's my obligation to tell people what's going on, because they really are being, and you know, they're being threatened with discipline if they don't keep up, you know. And so it's really frustrating. And the other thing too, just to let everybody know and your viewers know, because I know you have a lot of state employees that listen, on the 13th of January, we did have our right to work question in front of the state Supreme Court, and our pension question.
Yes.
And they did not make a ruling, and we're still waiting for the written opinion to come out from the court. That's 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And from the lines of questioning when I was there, I do have to say it did not sound too good. I was at the other, circuit court, and I'm not sure what's going to happen, but we're still waiting for them to rule on that. I mean,
I think I sort of have to ask the question that's sitting in the middle of the table and we're all looking away from it. Is all of this about gutting government so that it just doesn't exist anymore?
So it has no power?
It sure seems that way, and I tell you what, the issue seems like we really had the facts on our side in these lawsuits, and we've won all along at all the different levels of court. And who knows? You can't tell from a question, and I don't want to try to predict how they're going to rule. But to answer your question, Todd, it most definitely does seem like, speaking about the job satisfaction, it seems like a lot of these frontline jobs are really grinding people out, using them up, and getting rid of them.
Yeah. No satisfaction in the job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's frustrating.
There was a book called Closer to the Machine, written by a woman who was a computer programmer. And she was talking about all the marvels of the digital age coming, but she said the one big problem was that she had also in an earlier life been a social worker. And she said we could always find a way to hide in the various kinds of paperwork, slipping somebody a few extra bucks if they needed it, for example, to get a prom dress for the girl to go to the prom.
Right.
She said now that we've shifted to the computer, you can't anymore. You have no discretion. Everything is supervised. If they caught you doing that, you would be vilified in the press. You would be drummed out of the court. You might even face criminal prosecution for misuse of state funds. So, I mean, you've taken any of the joy out of the job because there is no more discretion anymore. And that I agree with you completely. We were talking in an earlier era about reinventing government and giving back people more freedom and more discretion to have creative solutions to things. And instead, we seem to be going in the other direction. I keep saying, you wouldn't want somebody to take over a car company who hated making cars and thought it was a bad idea. And but we've done that with government. Though sometimes I think the car companies did the same thing too.
Can I take over organized sports? I mean, I could. I'll do Jim Harbaugh's job at U of M for half of what they're paying me, and I'll save them millions of dollars a year by getting rid of everything.
You would too, wouldn't you?
I absolutely would, and I'd put the money in scholarships for needy people so that they could go to school and get real educations.
Who's the guy that makes what? I don't know how many millions a year. That's the head of the NFL. The guy who holds those non-press conferences. Just let me have the job for a week. At that rate of pay, if I had the job for a week, I couldn't retire.
Well, my spouse and I were talking the other night about Harbaugh's salary and MSU coach's salary, and he thought, I'd do that job 1 year.
Right.
And leave.
Right.
Exactly.
I said, okay, it's over. I'm good.
You could buy an island. Yes. You'd be.
So he's the highest paid public employee then, right? Was that?
Harbaught? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
$7 million a year.
He's the highest paid
And that means
public
Nick
employee.
Saban has to make more.
And-
That's in his contract.
And they'll do it.
Saban, in his contract, has to be the highest paid football coach in America.
Oh, God. So they'll call me in and tell me I get a pay
cut. How can you write
cut?
that into a contract?
Well, how did we write into Peter Lark's contract that it was?
Oh,
It's
what
the
a-
same guy.
Do we
Good
really
segue.
want to get into this? I mean,
I don't know how many of you, we've had him on the show. Steve Harry has steveharrypublicpolicy.com. He has this analysis of what happened year to year in those contracts that's just staggering. I mean,
Every year's worse
How
for
can
the
you-
public.
I am clearly the world's worst negotiator. I now make significantly less than I did 15 years ago. I mean, I'm really bad. He was able to parlay that in an amazing way.
absolutely.
You don't get that at the bargaining table, do you?
No, not at all. But speaking of that, though, I mean, we do see people in state government, not UAW Local 6,000 members, but people like who are connected politically get some pretty cool jobs, and then sometimes they are they announced that they're leaving, but they're not leaving. They're still on the payroll.
Yeah.
And you see these people that
Almost like ghost worker kind
were
of thing.
getting 90%, 80% raises that were investing money for the Department of Treasury.
They were up to
And
$300,000 a year.
So you see certain people in state government doing quite well, but it's not the caseworker sitting in the branch office down in Cedar and Jolly.
I got a
can
question.
guarantee you that.
The new director of this super agency, is that director going to make more money?
I have no idea.
Well,
I
I
think I
assume
want
he
more.
is.
What is the rationale for that merger?
Well, they do have some overlapping duties. Well, and the big thing is Medicaid. So DCH and DHS both deal with Medicaid, so they both deal with that, which is a huge, piece of government, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
And also to be clear, we're not necessarily opposed to the merger. We're just kind of concerned how it's going to work, and the devil will be in the details. And of course, we're concerned about potential outsourcing. But we do want to find efficiencies. We want government to work. Ultimately, it's about serving the citizens. And so it's not as if you're saying don't do it. Executive decision, and he has the power to do it. Governor Snyder does, but we're definitely watching very closely what happens.
When you do that big a reorganization, though, I mean, it has to be to some really good purpose. Otherwise, the chaos alone is costly. So there should be an immediately evident rationale for why this is a better way to do it, and I'm not clear that I see that. In fact, I know from having talked with various agencies, there were 33,000 officers in the New York City Police Department. When I was talking with a guy, I said, how do you manage a department that big? He said, you can't. He said, that's why they have precincts.
It manages you.
Exactly. So, I mean, you don't have precincts. You have this huge bureaucracy. It just seems to me staggering.
Well, and I don't think the governor has been able to clearly explain why this would be
Right.
more efficient. And he's even gone so far as to say that in order to do this reorganization, we're going to have to get, I think he called
Waivers.
it the mother of all waivers.
Right.
Or have to file tons of waivers in order to qualify for the continuing federal funding that we receive.
I thought his state speech was a little naive, and he was talking about one thing he said, if you remember, was people, not programs, and,
Yes.
and things
And
like
wraparound
that.
services.
Wraparound services being more holistic, which in theory, that does sound good, and that's something that does make sense.
We all want that.
Yeah, we all want that, right? But it's again, how's it really going to work out? They had the Pathways program where they're putting caseworkers in schools, which is a good idea, and that actually kind of does give some caseworkers some satisfaction. But what they've been handed, however, is a squirt gun and told to put out forest fires. So they go in these schools and they literally have all these kids in these at-risk schools, like coming on the caseworker. The caseworker's completely overwhelmed, doesn't have the resources to help them.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that, in theory, sounds great, but we got to make sure that we give the caseworkers the tools to carry out their jobs, or the resources to carry out their jobs. So again, it's kind of we'll kind of wait and see what happens with this merger. It's going to be huge. 14,000.
How do you manage that many people in the state? I mean, I know enough
You
about
don't.
state government. You can't manage.
You can't.
They manage you. I mean,
They do.
And Nick Lyons was appointed as interim director of Department of Community Health earlier this year, wasn't it? When Haberman left, and now he's appointed as interim for DHS. Now that Mara Corrigan has left. So he's still technically interim for both. No, I think they did finally appoint him as actual director for DCH.
Yeah.
But I do worry about his ability to get his hands around both bureaucracies.
And I could tell you in fairness to him, I've been doing a little research on his background. So he's worked for both administrations. I've talked with various people. They say he's really good. He's very open. He's not anti-worker. Very sharp, has an IT background. He's a younger person. He's younger than I am. But again, we're going to have to wait and see what happens. Right. And who knows if he's going to be there for the long haul or not. It is going to be interesting to see what happens.
Well, everybody's younger than I am, so.
Yeah.
On that cheery note. I want to thank Ray Holman of the United Auto Workers for explaining to us a lot of the things that are coming up and changes in state government and being on top of. I hope you'll return when the Supreme Court decisions come
be happy
down.
to.
Todd Heywood, who is always good to talk about what's happening politically and the Freedom of Information Act. We'll have him back soon. This is Lansing Online News Radio, and next week we will be visited by Joshua Covert, local attorney who's quite an activist on a variety of different issues and concerns, and he'll be bringing with him one of his clients that he's doing some things with. That gentleman was ill this evening. But we will be seeing them next Monday night at 7 o'clock. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Please join us again next Monday night at 7. We'll see you then.